Welcome to another video in the Cumulus Cycles Kubernetes series. If you've been following along with the prior videos, I'm sure you've noticed that each time the new Mongo pod is spun up, I need to jump into Mongo Express and rebuild the database. And although that's understandable due to the ephemeral nature of pods, it's also an issue because we obviously want to persist our database data. So in this video, we'll create a storage volume to address that issue. Now, similar to creating volumes and using Docker, as you can see here in this Docker compose YAML file, I've created a volume with a name @volume with a local driver. Then in the Mongo services spec, I've added volumes and specified the app volume that I created below, with a path to the location that Mongo stores its data. Now, in Kubernetes, we don't directly declare the persistent volume to store the data external to the pod. What we create is a persistent volume claim, or a PVC, which is a request for a persistent volume, which Kubernetes will create on our behalf and mount to the pod. So in the database folder, I'm going to create a new file named Mongo PVC YAML, and I'll add the specification which we'll walk through. So I start with the API version, and the kind will be a persistent volume claim. For metadata, I'll give this PVC a name of Mongo PVC, and in the spec, I'll declare the access modes as read write once, which means that this volume will be mounted as read-write by a single node. For resources, I'll make a request for the PVC and indicate 1 gig of storage. Now, in the Mongo pod definition file, I'll add an entry for volumes, give it a name of Mongo volume, and set the persistent volume claims claim name equal to Mongo PVC, which is the name we specified in the metadata for the Mongo PVC specification. Then in the container spec, I'll add an entry for volume mounts, give it the name of Mongo vol, which matches the volume name below, and a mount path of data_db, which, as mentioned before, is where Mongo stores its data. Now I'll jump into a terminal and apply the Mongo PVC definition. And if I do kubectl get PVC, we'll see the Mongo PVC was created. Now I'm going to go ahead and reapply the Mongo pod def. And now I'll do a kubectl get PV, and we see the persistent volume was created and bound to the claim Mongo PVC. So now if I jump over to a browser and load Mongo Express, once again I'll have to recreate the database and the collection and the documents. Now open up a new tab and test the application, and we see our data. So now I'm going to jump back into the terminal, and I'm going to delete the Mongo pod. And if I go back to the application in the browser and refresh, obviously we no longer have our data. So now let's go back to the terminal, spin up the Mongo pod again, go back to the browser and refresh, and now we have our data. And if we go to Mongo Express and reload the page, we see the data here as well. So that concludes this video on Kubernetes Volumes. I hope you found it useful.